haven't bought any new books in absolutely ages, but I suppose my self-control was only ever going to stretch so far. Hello, my name's Amy and welcome to another monthly reading vlog. Today I'm going to be starting off with a really small book haul. Like I said, I really don't buy that many books anymore. We recently redid our bookshelves and I became acutely aware of how many unread books I own. So I'm really trying to cut down on that spending at the moment, but my birthday is coming up next week. And we also wanted to buy a couple of new books for our baby because it does get a little bit tiring reading the same ones over and over again every day. So at the same time, I did decide to treat myself this week. Now, I went into the bookshop intending to pick up a couple of space operas. I did not get either of them. The shop just didn't have them. So they might be something I will order at a later date, but I just couldn't bring myself to leave empty-handed. So the first book I picked up was Blackfish City by Sam Millar. Now this is, I think, a relatively near future science fiction after the climate has massively deteriorated and it's set on a floating city in the Arctic. About the only thing I know about this one is that a new visitor turns up to the city with an orca and a polar bear. To be honest, apart from that, the blurb doesn't give a lot away. I've heard so much buzz about this one though. It's had really good reviews. And it just sounds a bit different from everything else I've read in sci-fi lately. The futuristic city aspect gives it a little bit of a cyberpunk sounding vibe, and that's definitely something I'm interested in. But at the same time, pretty much everything else about the blurb sounds very different to cyberpunk. So I don't really know what to expect from this one, apart from that everyone else who's read it has seemed to absolutely love it. So that's a good start. Now the second book I bought is also one that's been really highly reviewed. This is The Ember by Chris Wooding. Now I slightly hesitated over buying this one, not because I don't want to read it, because again, I have heard really good reviews about it, but it is over 800 pages and the text is quite small. It is an absolutely giant paperback. So I think I could easily spend an entire month or 6 weeks just reading this one. I feel like I haven't had massive success with epic fantasy recently. I really like reading epic fantasy, but I wouldn't have said that any of the ones I've read recently have gone into my favourites list. Having said that, I've had really good success with Chris Wooding books. His last series was The Tales of the Ketty J, which was a kind of steampunk fantasy about an airship crew. Now I actually only read the first of those, but I did really like it. To be honest, if I'd seen the others in more bookshops, I probably would have picked them up. I ended up reading the first book from the library and never getting any further with the series. But that might be something I'd like to go back to because it was really good. But I've also read Wooding's standalone, The Fade, which was set in an underground city in a cave. And I've also read The Braided Path, which was his first adult trilogy. He'd written for teenagers for several years before that, probably before YA was even considered a genre, particularly in the UK. The Braided Path came out at a guess in the early 2000s. I bought and loved the entire trilogy. So getting back to some Chris Wooding epic fantasy is going to be fantastic, and I know The Ember Blade is the start of a series. So aside from that quick little book haul, I'm also still reading Shifting Reality by Jansen. I'm not going to talk too much about that until I've finished it. I will just say I'm at about the 80% mark. It's done a really big shift in the last 20 or so pages that really took me by surprise, but I will talk about that more when I finish. I'm really enjoying it though, and it's definitely one of the better books I picked up at the end of last month. So now I just have to finish it. I've been calling this a vlog, but to be honest, I've done a really bad job of vlogging this month. Life has just been so busy. So it's kind of turned into a haul at the start of the month and now a wrap up as we get to the end of July. So first of all, I finished Shifting Reality that I was talking about weeks ago. I finished that really in the first few days of July and just never got around to vlogging about it. So this one I have mixed feelings about, but mostly positive. The first 3/4 of the book were really focused on life on a space station. There was a lot of politics on the space station. There was a lot of Indonesian culture, which I really liked. There was definitely a mystery element, but a lot of the plot felt quite small scale and personal. To be honest, it wasn't what I was expecting when I went into the book, but I did enjoy it, and I really liked the main character, Melati. And then at the 3/4 mark, things just took a huge turn. Now, I did not see this twist coming, which in some ways is good and in some ways isn't. It's good to be surprised, but there was really no build-up to this major twist. And it's slightly frustrating to not be able to predict it at all, because some of the things mentioned towards the end of the book had just never been mentioned before. They absolutely came out of nowhere. Suddenly the plot became much larger scale. We were talking about weaponry and a sort of secret society and lots of stuff that didn't feel very connected to the main plot on the space station. Now, technically it did all tie together, but perhaps not as neatly as I would have liked. And some of the major plot stuff from the start of the book got completely forgotten. There'd been a very early plot line about the fact that the main character was a teacher for these groups known as cohorts, which were groups of young children who kind of had memories downloaded into their bodies almost. And they then had to be trained and grow up really quickly to become workers for the space station. Now, this did kind of tie into the overall plot, but nowhere near as much as I'd expected. It kind of tapered off a bit, and towards the end of the book we just didn't even see the cohort until the very end. So I still gave this one 4 out of 5 stars because the writing was good and the characterization was good, and I enjoyed, well, to be honest, I enjoyed all of the book. It's just I felt there was a bit of a disconnect between the first 3/4 and the last quarter. So the second thing I picked up was Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. Now this is one I'd seen on my library catalogue before and kind of discounted. It's been marketed as YA, but when I read it, it was borderline whether I really felt it was YA or not. However, it's got a very YA cover and the blurb is very, very vague, certainly for the UK edition. I actually heard about this one in more detail on Alexa Dunn's channel. I will link to that down below because she talks about it in a lot more detail and a lot more intelligently than I'm going to be able to do. Trying to describe the plot of this one is really difficult. We've essentially got 5 main characters who knew each other at high school and have lost touch for the better part of a year, or one of the characters has lost touch with the others. She goes to meet up with the others because she wants to find out what happened the year before when her boyfriend was found dead. From there, though, things kind of just spiral out of control. The characters end up in a car accident and wake up with no real memory of what happened. They then learn that they are in something called a wake and they are going to relive the same night over and over again until they reach a consensus vote on who gets to live. The other 4 will die. So this was a tricky one for me. Really, I just didn't like any of the characters. To be honest, I never really warmed to any of them throughout the entire book. I really enjoyed the first kind of third. It was really quite creepy and unsettling. The writing is also absolutely beautiful. It also manages to avoid the pitfall of feeling repetitive, even though the characters are living the same night over and over again. So that was really well done. The second half slightly lost me a bit though. We've got some new plot devices added in, and to be honest, they didn't do a lot for me. There's the introduction of a sort of time travel, and I kind of felt that the second half of the book felt a bit more disjointed because the characters were jumping around between different locations. And like I said, I didn't really warm to any of the characters, so the stuff at the end that was supposed to be emotional and hard-hitting didn't do a lot for me, unfortunately. Also, on the subject of both the writing style and whether this is YA or not, I found that it was absolutely filled with what I assume are pop culture references, but I just did not get them at all. I don't even think this is a case of me being too old and missing the references. Lots of people were mentioned just in passing, and I just think they went absolutely over my head. Maybe the references that work better if you grew up in the US? I honestly don't know. They didn't feel like very YA jokes to me though a lot of the time. So this is a really odd book to review. I mean, I did overall like it, and it was quite a fast read, and the writing is beautiful. The concepts are absolutely fascinating. I can't fault that at all. It had some really creepy and atmospheric moments, but overall somehow the whole did just not pull together for me. I think, again, it's coming back to the characters. Because I didn't warm to them, I just never really warmed to the book as a whole. If you're looking for something really different in YA though, I would definitely check this one out. I've not seen it mentioned much. I think it's probably flown under people's radar. I think it's one you've just got to try for yourself, because descriptions, either, depending on whether you like it or not, either don't do it justice or hype it up too much. So finally, the last book I've been reading is The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. I mentioned this at the start of the month. It was one I bought as a sort of mini birthday haul to myself. I'm about 150 pages in. It is 800 pages long, so it's going to take me a while to finish, but I am really enjoying it so far. It's definitely old school kind of adventure epic fantasy, but I like the characters, and the world is absolutely full of really nice little details. Whilst the plot has been relatively simple so far, I do feel like the world as a whole is really nicely developed, and Wooding does a really good job of just putting these little tidbits in without ever making them feel overwhelming. So I feel like there's a huge amount more to explore. So there's not a huge amount I can say about this one yet because I'm not that far in, but I'm very much looking forward to reading more of it because I've definitely enjoyed what I've read so far. And that is where I am going to wrap things up. I will be talking more about the Ember Blade in my video for August, I'm sure. I will probably spend most of the month reading it because it's just so long. Keep reading, everyone, and I'll see you next time.